All right, let's get this party started. Welcome. You are in Get Your Front End Rolling with Vue and InertiaJS. I'm excited to speak with you today about this awesome topic. Let's first go over some expectations so you can make sure you're in the session that you want to be. So the things we're going to go over today, we're going to go over and do an overview of CB Inertia and InertiaJS, two libraries that will help get your front end rolling. We're going to go over why you would want to use this, an example app to see some of the performance characteristics, and we're going to do some live coding so you can see how the developer experience works out. It's going to help but not be required if you're familiar with Coldbox, handlers and routing, and Vue components and templates. Who am I? My name's Eric Peterson. I'm a software developer at Ortus Solutions. I've written lots of modules, including some that you'll see today. Have a beautiful wife, 3 kids. There's actually 2 dogs now. I need to update that. Type 1 diabetic and a theater nerd, among other things. Okay, so let's start talking about what is CB Inertia, what is InertiaJS. It's probably a library that you haven't heard of, that you were intrigued maybe because you saw Vue in the title, you saw Get Your Front End Rolling. So let's talk about why we're going to be learning another JavaScript framework. InertiaJS is a companion to many of the JavaScript frameworks that already exist. React, Vue, Svelte, they can all come along for the ride and join in with InertiaJS. So before jumping into its characteristics, let's talk a little bit about what we are looking in today's web apps. We're looking for something that's fast, something that's lightweight, something that's interactive. And we have a few options. The first is our tried and true, and if there is a better way to say this, multi-page server rendered apps. This is our Cold Fusion servers, right? This is our request response lifecycle, where we have a full page refresh every time that we have a URL come into our server. So pros about this, it's the code base we're familiar with. There's only one place that we need to worry about routing, about security, authentication, permissions. Some of the drawbacks is that full page refresh. It feels a bit slow. And JavaScript, which you'll want for some interactivity at some point, always feels kind of bolted on, right? Especially with today's frameworks that kind of feel like they want to take over everything, right? So there's option 1. Option 2 that we have are single-page apps, SPAs, SPAs, whatever you would like to call them. And these are very fast, interactive, and lightweight, right? We can get all of those boxes checked off. But on the con side, I mean, you're kind of building your app twice. You need an API now. And with an API comes a whole load of complexity. How are you going to authenticate that API? How are you going to secure it? You now have routing in both the client and on the server. You might have to deal with cores, which is a headache all unto itself. So we got that fast app we wanted, but there's quite the heavy cost. And so InertiaJS is trying to come into the sweet spot in the middle of these two. It's wanting to give you SPA-like performance without having to write an API at all. So pros about this, you have that single source of truth again. With using InertiaJS, your routing, your security, your authentication, they all live on your server where they already do. You don't need to duplicate it on the client side. But you still get that SPA-like performance without an API, and it's framework agnostic. We're going to talk about Vue today, but you can bring React, you can bring Svelte, you can use something besides Cold Fusion on the back end. Sorry, I didn't say that out loud. but it is framework agnostic. It's kind of the glue between these libraries, between your server and your client. So what is InertiaJS? It's less of a new JavaScript library and more the glue, the protocol that lets your server and your client talk to each other without having to write a formal API. Another way I like to think about it is you're going to replace your Vue layer, all your templates, with your favorite JavaScript templating language, be that React, Vue, Svelte, or others. So now that you're intrigued, a little bit of the background. This was built by a man named Jonathan Renink, who had the same problem, which was he wanted a performant, fast-feeling website, but did not want to write an API for all these things that nobody would ever use it besides his little website. If that makes sense. He didn't need a mobile app. He didn't need to give it to third-party integrations. He just wanted a faster front end. CB Inertia is the cold box server-side adapter that we're going to be looking at today. There are official server-side adapters for Laravel, Rails, lots of community adapters like Coldbox, and client-side adapters for React, Vue, and Svelte. So again, you can take your pick on what you're using on the back end, what you're using on the front end, and combine them using InertiaJS. Let's give a little bit of an experience here. This is a demo app built by the Inertia team. We'll zoom in a bunch here. And start going around, and you can kind of see how snappy it looks. In the URL bar here is updating just as you normally would, and if I just open this in a new page looks exactly the same. Opening up the dev tools, if we want to take a look, as I come around, you can see we're not doing full page requests, but there are all these XHR requests, these AJAX requests coming on here. That's the giving us that SPA-like performance that we're looking for. And we're going to see the code in the back end of this, but the validation that you'd see if I try to create this without filling in, that's not client-side validation. That's the same validation that you need on your server anyways, brought over to the client, right? All the routing that happens is happening on the client. The authentication that we did at the beginning is not on the client, on the server. The authentication is built into the server. You don't need to learn any new tricks to manage that. Another awesome example of an InertiaJS app is CFcasts. If you have not heard of CFcasts, it is an amazing resource for learning CFML, getting up to date on Cold Fusion training. And this entire site is an InertiaJS app. So you can see more of the performance characteristics. You can see how it feels like to browse around this site. We don't have an API for this. We didn't have to do any of those crazy tricks to get all of that great performance. And we still have wonderful interactivity thanks to Vue. Okay, so hopefully I have you intrigued. Let's talk about what it looks like to code using InertiaJS using CB Inertia. We'll start on the client side. A lot of the setup for Inertia is really just setting up Vue or React or any of those. So this will give you a little bit of a background in there as well. Here we'll install InertiaJS using that Vue 3 adapter and Vue itself. As for JavaScript in the modern age, we need some sort of bundler. You can use anything that can bundle JavaScript, Webpack, Rollup. I don't know what the new things are today. ESBuild, Snowpack. There's like a dozen or more. I'm using Vite. Vite was made by the creator of Vue. It is very fast. We have an official Coldbox plugin that makes it very easy to get started. So we'll install those dependencies as well. The Vite setup looks like this. Sorry, a little fast. Where we're adding in Coldbox and Vue and pointing it at a single file right here. So not as complicated as you might be worried about, especially if you were in like the Webpack 2 or Webpack 3 days. This is all that you'll need for the setup on the build. That app.js file really can be broken down to 3 points. We create Vue. That one would be there regardless if this was an Inertia app or not. We create our Inertia app outside there, giving it an ID, a title, and this setup method. And then finally, and this will come in the next few slides, we're going to tell it where to find our pages. From our server, we're going to say we want to render a component, and then this will pick it up and say, look in the pages directory and look for that component name, .vue. That gives us a folder structure that looks something like this. We have that resources, assets.js. Right at the bottom here is our app.js we just looked at. And all this inside pages are those Vue files. So if we ask to go to the users index page, it would go in users folder, index.vue. That's the page it would try to render. That's this little section right here about resolving the page component. The server-side setup is not quite as complex. CB Inertia is a cold box module that's going to do all the heavy lifting for you. It is very possible to use this without cold box, though you'd have to be making some AJAX requests yourself and things like that. Much easier just to install this and get going. Okay, let's talk about what it looks like to use it. This is where familiarity with cold box handlers, cold box routing is going to help. I'll bring you up to speed as fast as we can if you're not familiar with it. So here's how you would simply render a page. And this is a cold box handler, so it's going to respond to a route, say something like /dashboard. It calls an index method here. And inside that method, all we want to do is say, show this page. We've injected this CB Inertia helper, and we call a render method, and we pass the page name. As we showed before, that dashboard index is going to match our folder structure. Look in the dashboard folder, look for an index.vue file. Here's a very simple template that could look like on the Vue side. All these examples should be using Vue 3. Inertia does work with Vue 2 as well, in case you haven't made the jump. And again, React, Svelte. Fill in your favorite template here. Really, the only thing different from a regular plain Vue file here is this link component provided by Inertia. This lets us, it looks like an anchor tag, it works like an anchor tag, but Inertia is going to use that to make those background requests and keep our SPA-like performance. Of course, a page is just by itself isn't quite as exciting, not as useful as a page that we can pass data to. In all of these JavaScript frameworks, they have taken to calling these props, short for properties. You can pass those along in Inertia. Here's the same call to render, this time to a user's index view, and we can pass a struct with keys and values. Anything that can be serialized to JSON can come here. So in this case, I'm calling some service that's going to return an array of structs for my users. Down on the Vue side, at the very bottom, we can define our props. We can say we're expecting a user's array and loop over that in the traditional Vue fashion. You'll notice that on the Vue side, very little changes using Inertia versus not. Mostly you just get rid of the complexity of needing, you don't need Vue router, you don't need Vuex or Pinia, you don't need state management. All of that gets to live back in your server where it is anyway. This is a very common thing to render components, so we have a couple helpers because we like to be a little less verbose. You can call the inertia method to get access to that injection in any cold box handler. So this is functionally the same as the last one we saw, and we even make it one step shorter. You can just pass it all into inertia. The model exists for some advanced things that we probably won't get into this talk, sharing some data. But that is as simple as it gets on the cold box handler side. Pretty slick. Okay, we've talked about showing pages. We talked about passing data to those pages. How about getting data out? It's just a form request, right? A good old form here on the page. Let's dive down into some things specific to inertia. First, I like to point out that one great thing about using a JavaScript framework as your view layer is you get access to any components that you need to make. So here we're using these text and select inputs that we've made that will be custom JavaScript, have nice functionality built in, a loading button that's going to prevent them and show a little spinner. All of us have probably pulled in some select library, some multi-select, select2, changed over the years, jQuery multi-select. That's the reason we usually start, reaching for these JavaScript libraries, is we want that ability and that nice user experience. So we have these custom components that we can use. Each of them can bind to this form property. So we've defined a first name, last, email, password, and owner. When we submit the form, we can call a method on the form to post it to a route. This is going to be a route my application can respond to. A post request to /users is the way I want my application to accept a form request for this. You can use put, you can use delete as well. You can do those programmatically as well instead of just using these shortcuts. We get a nice processing here where we can disable this loading button while it's loading. And all of that comes from Inertia's use form here at the bottom. This is very handy. It's available again in all of their adapters for Vue, React, and Svelte. It is not required to use Inertia. You can, if I simply made a HTTP request to this user's endpoint and passed my data, Inertia would know how to respond to that as well. But it's much simpler to pass through their form here. On the server side, here's my user's handler. I mentioned that it was going to respond to that create event. So I have a create method. And the first thing I have in here is my validation right here. You need validation on the server side, period, right? It's not really optional because you got to make sure the data that's coming in is good. You also want it on the client side because you want to give your users feedback on why you didn't have their request come in. You want it to pop into the right form elements, all that kind of things. Well, Inertia will send back errors, and CB Inertia as well, that you can then attach to each of those fields. And now you're sharing that validation logic across. Because it's just a AJAX request and not a full page submission, it's fast. And you don't really need to reach for complicated client-side validation libraries. We'll show a little bit more of that in our live coding examples. Then with that validated data, I'm going to create a user in my database. And my favorite thing, I want to send them to a new page. What do I do? Well, in a traditional server app, I would relocate them, right? Send a 302 response, and then the browser would automatically follow it to the next page. I can do the same thing in Inertia. This will send them to my /users page without me having to think about it, without making a full page request. I mentioned there were some advanced things you could do, like sharing data that needs to be available on all pages. This is an example of how to do that in ColdBox. We have our share method here. You give it a key and the value that you want. Anything that's in a closure or a function will get evaluated just before inertia renders, so it's kind of a lazy loading of that value. And this is where we share if the user is logged in and the data about it, and also any errors that came from our form. That's how each page will have access to that data. You can add in anything that you need to share on these pages. You can share it on a subgroup of pages, anything that you need there. Inertia has persistent layouts as well, because it would be a shame to have that full HTML template on every view. So if we have a view like this with dashboard index, we can adjust the head and set title, meta tags, anything that we need there. And right down on this section, we can import a layout and set it. Inertia even supports nested layouts, where you can have more than one at a time. On the layout side, really the only thing that is special here is this slot parameter. In React, this would be props.children. I do not know the Svelte one, because I have not done Svelte, but somebody probably does out there. That page will get slotted in right there. If you have multiple layouts, each layout will get put into each slot. There's a lot more to CB inertia. We talk about programmatic navigation, so you can tell it exactly what page to go to. It can detect when your assets have changed and force a reload, which is very tricky if you've ever dealt with like progressive web apps. Scroll region, partial reloads, nested layouts, local state cache, prop transformation, and more. But instead of going through all those in slides, I thought we'd start with an example and do a little bit of live coding here. We went over the setup earlier, the client side and the server side. You can skip all of that and use one of our awesome Coldbox app templates and jump straight into using InertiaJS, and that is what we're going to do together. And jump to some coding. All right, let's zoom in a lot more. There we go. Let's make a demo site and jump into it. I'm going to use VS Code here. Make that a lot bigger as well. And the question of the day while that's coming up is it easier to see this dark theme or this light theme? Which one? Any preference? Well, light's better? Okay. Sounds good. I feel like that changes depending on which projector I'm on. Okay. So I'm in this new inertia demo folder. I've opened up command box here. I'm going to use that command that we copied earlier. Not that one. I thought I copied it. Good. Coldbox, create app. We're going to tell it I want to use this template, which is quick, tailwind, inertia. Okay. We'll change a quick environment variable setting. We're going to use different database. That should be good. We'll start a server. While that's starting, let's take a look at our sidebar, our folder structure. If I go to resources, assets.js, I can start to see the same that we had earlier. Let's shut that down for a second. Here's our app.js file. We're creating our inertia app, giving it a title template that it's going to follow. We're going to resolve our page out. Here I'm actually giving it a default layout, so I don't have to do that each time. and creating our app. I did just realize one issue with the server I started, which is for some reason it did Adobe, and I don't really need Adobe right now. Okay, so one nice thing about this example is it's going to come out of the box with a working registration and authentication system that we can dive into. It's telling us our manifest file is not found and we need to run Vite. That's a nice thing from our ColdBox Vite plugin. I'll start a new page, npm install to install all of the dependencies. And I have a dev script that runs Vite for us. There we go. Yeah, if you're used to Webpack, this might be the biggest takeaway of it. That just started in 257 milliseconds. It's ready to go. Even if I was building instead of just running it in dev mode, we're talking about seconds, not minutes. Okay. I'm going to get our database up and running. I'm using command box migrations to just create tables quickly. One of these comes with the template. You do not have to use it. If you're curious, it's just making a table with ID, email, and password. And with all that, we should be ready to load into our application. All right. So I'm going to open up the network tab just so we can kind of, again, see what's going around here. We have a login page. If I just try to hit the login page, you see I've come back with validation errors, and I'm putting them under each of the fields as we want. If I put in, my email and some random password, submit that, we get an invalid credentials. All of that's happening just on the server side. To show that, we have this view inside sessions new. And you can see I'm checking for errors right here. If we have a form error for login, put it right here. If we have a form error for email, we're going to add some dynamic classes, right? For each of the errors in email, put out the message here. None of those are down here in this Vue script. You can see it's a very small script section, just using a form from Inertia. If I head over to our ColdBox sessions handler, this is what's responding to login. We can see when I come here, it's just a new sessions new page. And when I create it, here's my validation step. This is using CB validation. Very easy way to use that inside of ColdBox. You could roll your own as well. The key is I'm returning all of that in that errors struct inside of this shared method right here. So if email is not passed in or password is not passed in, that's what creates the error here on my server. And I'm putting them all inside that errors. Additionally, if I get invalid credentials back, that's where I make that login error. So all the validation that I need on my server is all the validation I need at all for this. We can't log in yet because we don't have a page, an account, that's the word. Let's go ahead and register for one. If we get rid of some of this. Here we go, register. So you'll see we made a new request. It was an XHR request, and I want to just show you under the hoods what that looks like. This is what comes back. It is a JSON response, but you didn't have to write it, right? Inertia knows when it needs to send back HTML, when it needs to send back JSON. It tells us the component, and it gives us any props that we need. These are those shared props, so they're going to appear on every page, and it would also include any props that I wanted to pass along as well. If I come to registrations here, and I pass in a greeting of hello CFCamp, we can come here and hit the register page again, and here's our greeting, hello CFCamp. That's how you get access to this data. go ahead and register for an account now. Sign up, and we are logged in. There is nothing on the client side that says I'm logged in. This is just your traditional, I have a session. I'm sending back the user in that shared response. If we go look at that. In fact, I can even look in the Vue DevTools, which is very nice. Props, auth, well, that's old, isn't it? Let's see. There we are. And it has my logged in account inside there. That's how we know we're logged in. If we log out of the session. It's not having to keep track of them separately. Okay. So let's add in some other things here for this. I'm going to add in a few more dependencies real quick for some of the views that I'm going to throw in here. Oops. This does, in addition to having Vue set up and Inertia set up, it also has Tailwind CSS, which is, I can wax poetic about it later. That's not what this session is about, but I happen to think it's incredible. If you haven't used it, please come ask me about it, and I'd be happy to talk your ear off. Okay, I want to show you tests. That was the other thing. Here we go. Let's go to our tests. These tests are going through TestBox and ColdBox built-in integration testing. And we have tests for all of this right here about logging in and registering users. They're all passing, so let's jump in and look at what those tests look like. If you're not familiar with TestBox, just come along for the ride. So we're going to make sure we're logged out before each of our registrations. And for creating a new user, we're just making sure there's 0 users. When we hit our registrations route with valid parameters, now we should have 1. And I can test all of the errors as well down here where I pass in something that's not an email. I should have an error and nothing created. The login spec is very similar, where the action is coming right here in this post, where I'm passing in valid parameters, and the logged out user should be logged in. None of this hits inertia, right? Like inertia is going to return a redirect, which is fine. We could put that at the bottom of our test and say we expect to be redirected here. But we don't need to worry anything special about that. So let's do one like TDD test together. And we'll do it, we're going to add like blog posts, because that's my go-to thing. So I'm going to add a mapping inside of my test application CFC so I can easily get to the CB inertia, because there are some nifty test box matchers we're going to want to use. And we'll make a new posts spec file. Posts, get rid of those 2 tests, and it can show a list of posts. And finally, we'll add our matchers right here. TestBox gives you a way to add in custom assertions. This is adding the ones from inertia, so we are going to be able to say we want to make sure that this kind of component comes back, things like that. So if I ask for my posts, and we'll expect what comes back to be an inertia response. Let's just start with that. We're going to do this true TDD style where it's going to fail each step of the way until we get it working. So it tells me post is not an event. That's because there's no route for it. I'll come into my router and add a request to post. Should go to my post handler to an index method. Now I'm being told you don't have that, which is fair. So we'll make a posts CFC and an index method. That was not what I expected to get. And then, I'm not running. 1 second. There we go. All right, so Coldbox is trying to find an index view by default, but we don't want that. We want to use inertia. And we're going to go to a post index. And there we go. It says it's passing. If I said, post show instead here, I must have a bad, did I not put that in the test? Oh, I said I only wanted it to be inertia response. So yes, right now that is correct. No matter what I return from posts, it is technically an inertia response. We can continue to do chaining from here by asking questions about this page to be inertia component, and now we can say this should be the post index component. Here we go, we're getting where it should have been post index, we got post show instead. We can go ahead and change this back to index. We can continue to do tests, assertions, asking if it has props. So I could say it should have a post prop. So prop. Gives you a nice debug output showing you what props actually came back and what you were looking for. And you can continue to dive into that and make sure that all of that looks how you want. And that is the testing story on the inertia side. To finish up this page and just to show off a little bit more, let's just change a couple things into our application. Grab this little template here. We're going to go replace our nav bar. And we'll jump out of the tests. Now we've replaced our nav bar, so we have this little blog. Blog doesn't go anywhere. In fact, clicking on it is giving me an error that, hey, you haven't made a post index view. All right, pages, posts, index.view, and we'll go copy in some section right over here. Put that in, and now, let's see. It's expecting us to be passing along posts. Missing required prop posts. Back in our post handler, let's just go ahead and pass an empty array of those. And here we are. Now, I've defined a few properties on this post view for each of the posts where it's looking for title, body, ID, things like that. Normally, I'd make a model that would represent it, serialize it. But here we can just throw some stuff in here. Let's see. Create a date. So you can imagine all these coming back from a model, a table in your database. Category. I think that's all the fields. Let's see how we did. Broke something. Oh, it doesn't have an author. Let's see. ID1, email. I think that's it. There we go. We got a little post here. Again, all the data inside the Vue template is just being looped over with normal Vue things, showing the post title here, creating links with string interpretation, pretty relatively straightforward Vue things, but all of this happening without an API, sharing all of the authentication and validation code on my backend server, not having to worry about duplicating that in more than one place. Again, if you're looking for great examples, on the InertiaJS page, you can get to their demo app to see any of the data and to play around with this. You can also come over and play on CFcasts, which is another great example of an Inertia app. Okay, and, well, it took me back to the beginning. But here's some great links for you to follow up on. We have reached the end of this. You can get to InertiaJS.com. CB Inertia is available on ForgeBox, as well as that template to help you get started. You'll be able to review this video later, and there's also a video on CFcast if you want to jump into more. I'm also available for any questions after this. Thank you for attending, and good luck with getting started with Inertia and Vue.